Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour or so then, we will see what's making the headlines with The Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, and the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar. Great to see both of you. So, front pages then, big day for news, obviously. The Eye leading on the news of the delay to so-called Freedom Day, with the lockdown set to continue for another 4 weeks. That same story leads the Metro, which says freedom has been put on ice on the hottest day of the year. And will we ever be free, asks the Sun. That's also on the front page of the Yorkshire Post, which says the delay is due to concerns over the spread of the Delta variant. The Guardian says the next 4 weeks will be used to vaccinate more people, with younger people also set to be offered the jab. The Daily Mail is concerned that Boris Johnson was unable to guarantee that the economy would fully reopen come the 19th of July. The Telegraph says there's a lack of clarity on when exactly the restrictions will end, with a picture there of anti-lockdown protesters. While the Financial Times leads on the disappointment felt by businesses after Boris Johnson told them they would get no further support despite the delayed reopening. So let's get the thoughts then of The Sun's Harry Cole and The Mirror's Pippa Crerar. As predicted really by both of you last Monday, this has happened. Harry, let's go to you first of all. What are your headlines from today?
Well, look, I thought it was a really different Boris Johnson today. If you would remember back to someone like Dominic Cummings' evidence to Parliament a few weeks ago, where he lifted the lid on the battles to go back into lockdown last year, where it was a sort of Prime Minister battling against everyone else, and he was, putting, semi-arbitrary dates on things, saying it'll all be done in 12 weeks, it'll be done by Christmas, it'll all be done by Easter, and now here we are again. But the Prime Minister did avoid, I think that was the biggest thing for us, that when actually asked, is it really going to be July 19th? He went, I hope so, but, I'm not going to make any promises. And it just shows you what that 15 months has done to Boris Johnson as a politician, as a leader, and as an expectation manager. And frankly, it was a hefty caveat. So we now get to do what we've been doing for the last month, which is trying to work out from scouring the data, seeing what's going on, talking to ministers and things, working out whether it really will be July, or whether it could, heaven forbid, slip into the school summer holidays.
Yes, I think my favourite was the Daily Telegraph headline, which was, it's definitely July the 19th, unless it's not, which is the most unusual Telegraph headline I've seen for a while. He did talk about Terminus Day, didn't he, on July the 19th, and you wonder where that confidence comes from, because the graph of cases goes up, and we saw Professor Chris Whitty standing there saying, make no mistake, the cases will continue to rise. But also we had Pippa, Public Health England, reporting today, fantastic news on 2 doses and the risk of hospitalisation.
That's right. They have done their research now, and the findings are out today, and they suggest that both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca jabs are more than 90% effective when it comes to reducing hospitalisations. So obviously that means they have a strong impact on the seriousness with which people are affected by COVID. Now, that is brilliant news, because some of the scientists suggested that it might not be that high. This is, of course, after 2 doses of the jab. After 1 dose, it's quite substantially lower. So that really underlines how important it is for people to get the second jab, and goes some way to explain how and why the government has decided to speed up the rollout. So we now have, by July the 19th, this new target date. They want to make sure that over 40s have had their second jab. That might mean reducing the amount of time between doses from 12 weeks to 8 weeks to make sure that it can all be done, and to make sure that everybody, all adults, have had their first dose. Which, although it doesn't offer a complete protection, sort of sets them on the path to getting that protection. I mean, vaccines are still our way out of this. I think I was quite interested to see Boris Johnson's slight change in tone today, as Harry referred to it. But there was a lot of mixed messages there still. He can't help himself. And I don't think it was so much expectation management, Harry. I think it was more that he can't bear to disappoint people. So by talking about the terminus date, as at the same time as saying, well, he couldn't rule out the lockdown lifting being even later than July the 19th. he was trying to give people some hope. And actually, I don't think those mixed messages are particularly helpful, not just to us, the general public, but to all those businesses who are obviously still going to be severely impacted by all of this.
Yes, or he might have the likes of Sir Graham Brady, Mark Harper, Steve Baker, all of whom who ask questions of Matt Hancock in the Commons at 8:30 tonight, ringing in his ears. And that's the problem, isn't it? There's a wing of the Tory party that really don't want any of this. Go to the Daily Mail, for example. The Prime Minister, the curbs could go on and on. You know, the right-wing press, if I can describe it so loosely, is also of that vein.
No, I think there are lots of people, crying out to be unshackled. Businesses, especially pubs. This is meant to be a glorious summer of them with our hosting of the Euros, but they are going to be down, £3 billion for this delay. Their views need to be represented and listened to. But Pippa, you're right. I do think there has always been a slight inability to announce bad news without some silver linings for the Prime Minister, and there were a couple today. I think we can all probably discard the idea of a two-week review clause should things go remarkably the other way by July the 5th. But good news for people that wanted to get married outdoors, a sort of tacit concession really that outdoor mixing doesn't do a huge amount of spreading this, and capacity up for Wembley for our hosting of those Euros, as I said. And Wimbledon looks set to be the first sporting event to have full capacity for its final in 15 months. Whether we'll get to that stage remains to be seen. But crucially, what they're waiting for, and it's not necessarily all bad news, is they just want the definitive proof that that yes, cases can go up, and yes, even hospitalizations may go up. But does that translate into deaths? There were some real doomsday graphs around from the medics, from SAGE, from various other universities that were presented to SAGE today that pointed that they could go back to those god-awful days of 500 deaths a day if the brakes aren't put on now. Whether or not the Tory party will put up with, that wing of the Tory party you mentioned will put up, I think they can live with 4 weeks. I don't think they can live with 4 months.
That's interesting, isn't it? Nor can many businesses, the point you were making just there. If we go to the Financial Times, they quote the figure you used there, 3 billion cost in lost sales for hospitality. UK Hospitality, the industry trade body, suggesting the new delay would put 300,000 jobs at risk, while the FT points out the government has already spent 407 billion on supporting companies, but many are concerned about the tapering off of some of these schemes. Be it, they want more culture grants, and the rent holiday, the eviction moratorium, not to mention the furlough. There's lots of things that the pressure is now on the Chancellor to look again at, Pippa.
Yes, and what the Treasury have been saying today, and I suspect we'll hear more of over coming days when the calls intensify on them to do more for businesses that are going to be affected by this delay, is that Rishi Sunak factored into his budget prospect of lockdown lifting not going according to the roadmap as was set out at the time. And so, for example, you have the furlough scheme and various other schemes going on till September. Although, as you rightly point out, Anna, there's the tapering which starts very soon, and companies are going to be asked to contribute 10% initially and into the furlough costs, and then that'll obviously go up. And if you don't have an income as a company, then that potentially is going to be very difficult to do. So, therefore, potentially leading to lots of job losses. And there are all sorts of other things that, as the FT points out, that the businesses want the government to do, such as small business grants. They want to wipe out some of those loans, those bounce back loans, which you'll remember from the beginning of the pandemic. They want to extend full business rates relief for companies in the sectors which are worst hit by this, so retail, hospitality and leisure. Yet Boris Johnson was quite clear today that there's not going to be any extension to any of those schemes. I think they will be under intense pressure, and it'd be interesting to see as Harry suggests, if it goes on beyond these 4 weeks. I think the government may have to think again on that.
And we also heard today that 23 and 24-year-olds, Harry, will be invited to pick up their jab from tomorrow. We also heard questions, and this is the beginning of the argument shaping up on whether or not you should vaccinate children. Previously, we'd heard that in smallpox, for example, you vaccinated children to save children. The problem with COVID is you vaccinate children to save adults, and that makes it morally harder to justify unless you look at this other argument, which is what the Telegraph's picked up, which is you do it to keep them in classes.
Yeah, I mean, this has been sort of rumbling below the scenes for a little while, but as you so rightly say, the closer we get to, that July 19th date of all adults being vaccinated, the sort of pressure to keep going, if we have got supply, I think is going to get very, very loud, especially if we sort of get through to the school holidays and cases are dropped, perhaps, lift some of the scientists say actually there'll be a natural dip in transmission when the schools break up anyway, just because you're breaking up those large gatherings. And whether it's, as the Telegraph is sort of getting a sniff of, is what happens when it's for kids to go back to school in September? What happens if we're having these arguments and these issues in the middle of the height of summer about the Indian variant cases going up? What's it going to be like in a rainy November and a snowy December? So I suspect we'll end up in a sort of situation where no one will be forced to have it, but I think it will certainly be available to children.
Yeah, very, very quickly, Pippa, your thoughts on that?
Well, as somebody who has one of my children between July last year and March this year was actually only in school for 6 weeks because of self-isolation, because of obviously cases in the class, I can definitely see the advantages for not interrupting their schooling and that being a reason which I think many parents would support when it comes to vaccinating their kids. But this is obviously safety issues there as well, and or safety concerns, and parents will want reassurance on those before they agree to it.
Yeah, well, that's bad, isn't it? 6 weeks. You poor thing, your poor child as well. Very, very tricky. Safety is key. We heard from Professor Whitty. Luckily, other countries are doing it before us, so you've got real-world data to look at about that crucial safety question. But lots for parents to consider as we go on through the months. Lots more still to come, including a look at this story in the FT, NATO's warning against China's military ambitions. Discussing that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole, both of you back from Cornwall and the G7. Obviously, we've already had the NATO meetings. We'll come on to that in a minute. But let's go to the Metro first of all. Joe Biden, it says, urged Boris Johnson to protect the Northern Ireland peace process in a candid, private, face-to-face meeting during the G7 summit. It has been revealed. Yes, go on then, Harry. You're laughing.
Yeah, I mean, this was the story that was meant to be the big thing that was going to blow up Boris's, first face-to-face meeting with Biden. It was going to be a big showdown. It was going to be everything, and then it sort of fizzled out a little bit. And bravo to the Metro for trying to, revive it. But Downing Street were pretty pleased with how the Biden meeting went. They're pretty pleased with how the G7 went. And frankly, having a row with the French doesn't tend to do a Tory politician's poll rating that big a dent. Now, classic bad has sort of rolled on to Brussels now with Biden, visiting. He popped in to see the Queen for tea, broke all sort of normal diplomatic protocol of discussing with American press pack what he talked about the Queen with, and then rolled into Brussels to his first meeting at NATO. Now, biggest contrast of the last few years is just how normal these things have been. The G7, there was no. The US president throw starburst at Angela Merkel like Donald Trump did. He actually signed the communique. He turned up to Brussels and NATO and didn't threaten to pull the US out of it. I just think the Trump era really is just being slowly, etched from the annals of history by Biden. I think that's sort of fascinating to watch. Sort of the unstitching of what were 4 very turbulent diplomatic years. But it has to say, it made the summits a little fun to cover.
Yes, I bet it did. And obviously the big issue on the front page of the FT and indeed in that Metro article we saw too, in the last minute of our programme, Pippa, is China a major security risk according to NATO?
Yes, and the US wants to make sure that NATO, as well as the G7, take a more robust line against China, which hasn't obviously been traditionally seen as much of an opponent as Russia. And NATO leaders in that communique that Harry mentioned had warned about the systemic challenges that China presents, and the need, therefore, for the leaders to take very robust action, and that is everything from its sort of nuclear ambitions to its presence in its cyber warfare, in cybersphere, and big challenges ahead there, which they were trying to strike a sort of a consensual tone on. To obviously more, if NATO and indeed the G7 unite against China, they're a more powerful adversary, aren't they?
Yep, and onto that meeting with President Putin too. So lots of fascinating days ahead, no doubt, for Joe Biden and the rest of us.